to the Cosmic Dispatch, a show about celestial bodies, earth bodies, time experience, and the relationship between all of them. I'm your host, Cory Nakasue. Hey everybody, how's it going? It's good to be back here in the studio at Radio Kingston, and a special thank you to Shay and the Catskills for covering for me and doing such a wonderful job. Um, I had a reading with Shay yesterday, and let me just say, I highly recommend. It was really wonderful. Um, I I was gone. I pretty much missed all of Leo season, which I'm halfway sad about not covering because this Leo season has some deep stories in it. But at the same time, it also really made astrological sense for me to disappear. My my journey kind of mirrored Venus's journey this season. Um, I left for Amsterdam a little after Venus's retrograde, and now I'm back after the Venus Cazimi we had last week. And also Venus's transition, which is Venus's transition to a morning star. Um, Venus is still technically combust, which means she's still hidden by the sun's beams, but we're going to be seeing her very shortly. Um, this Leo season, of which we have 3 more days of, really had slash has its its own unique, very unique signature. A lot of you reached out over the last few weeks to share how much this season was so deeply felt. And I'm right there with you. I heard a lot of stories paralleling Inanna's journey underground. If you're familiar with that myth of Inanna, um, and you want to learn more about the Venus retrograde and Venus cycles, I would check that out. Um, and I also people got in touch with me with a lot of stories about surprise, upsets, and dark nights of the soul. And I also received some questions like, I thought this was going to be a hot, fun Leo season. And to that, I can answer, I think it was for some people. Not all of us are storing the same things in our underground chambers. Um, there are people who repress joy, passion, creative expression. There are people who repress playfulness. And if you're one of those people, you may have had the experience of like finally giving into or indulging in some very fun, sexy, and exciting things. But some of us hold shame down there, or fear, or grief. And this Venus retrograde journey, which isn't done yet, is investigating all of it. And there is no right or wrong way to experience it. Um, but we must experience it. That is, if you want to learn something or if you want to grow. Personally, I was planning to do a lot of creative work. And what actually ended up happening is I did some creative work and I rested and I allowed things to come up. I didn't know how deeply tired I was until I changed my routine and took myself out of my usual environment. And what also happened, which I think most people can relate to, when you take yourself out of your usual habits is things that are hidden reveal themselves. And this being Leo season with a Venus retrograde, things came up around identity, creative work, relationships, what it means to be a woman, and all the other stories that are just no longer relevant for me. And also then the searching my heart to figure out where the authentic desires live. I spent last week's Kazemi, which is what we call Venus's conjunction with the sun in Iceland, a place I've never visited before. And last week's Kazemi was square to Uranus. And I really feel like I was in the appropriate place, not only because Iceland is like another planet that literally explodes and purges itself into being. It's so alive, but because I was so moved by the unique beauty of this place. That's another Uranian thing, unique beauty. Um, I just fell in love with it. I didn't want to come back. There's a vividness and again, explosiveness to it. And I just felt very confronted with the beauty of this earth. I wept a couple of times because of the staggering beauty of this place, but not just because of that, but also because it was juxtaposed with the devastation that we're experiencing on this planet right now. Um, the horrific fires in Maui being just one example of this tumultuous summer. By the way, if you'd like to donate to a relief effort for the residents of Maui, please visit hawaiicommunityfoundation.org, where you can donate to the Maui Strong Fund. Money from this fund goes directly to feeding and housing those displaced by the Lahaina fire. And a little tip, if you're looking to donate to any organization, I think the more local the organization, the more expedient, um, the quicker people get the things they need. So, but that's one Venus retrograde story, and we're honestly still in the middle of it. Though I think this journey it gets easier once we hit September. We have some very interesting astrology this week. As I mentioned, we're in the final days of Leo season with the sun entering Virgo on the 23rd. We sometimes forget that, among other things, Leo is very interested in the endurance of things. So, like the eternal flame, everlasting light, the endurance of love, creation, and legacy. But we have a transition this week from the fiery embers of Leo to the grounded machinations of Virgo. So, as promised, we're going to dive into this week's astro weather. But before we do that, just want to remind you that if you would like to have a question answered on the air, that you can email us at thecosmicdispatch@gmail.com and stay up to date with all of our content on Instagram. And please subscribe to the Cosmic Dispatch on YouTube. Okay, so the big astrology of the week kicks off on the 22nd with some really high flying transits. On this day, we have two big events taking place in the sky. Venus is square to Jupiter and Mars's opposition to Neptune. The square aspect and the opposition are both considered tense aspects. They demand something from us, whether that's action, balance, confrontation. We're made to feel uncomfortable enough to do something. And when I say uncomfortable, I'm not always talking about pain. This could be impatience, excitement, anticipation. These are forms of discomfort that also often push us to resolve something. Let's talk about the Venus square to Jupiter first. As we know, over the past week, it's all been going on with Venus and the Sun in Leo, and squaring the planets in Taurus. As we know, what did we just have there? We had the Cazimi there that I mentioned earlier in the show. We had Venus with its square to Uranus. The Sun had its square to Jupiter. And then there was that electrifying new moon in Leo with its square to Uranus. So this week, this transit of Venus in Leo squaring Jupiter and Taurus just continues the themes of the rebirth of Venus. Only with Venus and Jupiter now, we're trying to figure out how all these new epiphanies, purifications, reanimations of our desire or love apply to our everyday lives. Our lives, which are populated by other people and commitments and other demands. What do we do with our newfound feelings or perspectives? Also, how do we integrate the new lessons that we learned about ourselves? Jupiter has a lot to do with integration. This is a time for some practice. We take Venus out of the feeling realms and we try something, like we actually do something. And FYI, this Venus Jupiter story ain't over yet. They meet up again due to retrogrades next month. But honestly, because of the retrogrades and the slowness of both Venus and Jupiter, that Venus Jupiter square is in play for about 4 weeks. So just wanted to make note of that. So what are you trying out in your relationships, your artistic practices, even your finances? Venus is a asset planet and Jupiter's in Taurus. Taurus is a finance sign. If you're valuing things differently, how does that show up in some of the choices that you're making? Now is the time to practice some integration. And I don't think it will be hard. If anything, we might go a little overboard. We might be feeling a little overconfident and pushy with our like newfound sense of self-worth or our new aesthetics. And desires might feel very do or die right now. This can be exciting and fun, and we should be excited to practice. Just take note that it's very possible to overextend because we're not as experienced as we might be feeling, which is why I'm using the word practice. So there's the first big transit on the 22nd. It has this feeling possibly of being off the mark about something or something getting blown out of proportion. And there is a second transit on this day that adds to this overblown, overhyped quality. Mars in Virgo opposes Neptune in Pisces on the 22nd as well. In this situation, Mars is really fired up about pinpointing something, getting super clear, super organized, very confident in its abilities to clean up messes, sort out misunderstandings, and basically get everything in good working order. And then it's confronted with Neptune in Pisces. This is an opposition. So you can imagine them just staring at each other. Um, and this is a culmination moment very similar to a full moon. Neptune, on the other end of this opposition, kind of simultaneously undoes with one hand all of the things that Mars is trying to do with the other hand. There's a bit of Sisyphus in this combination where Mars pushes the boulder uphill and Neptune lets it slide back down. Or whack-a-mole, where every time Mars hits the mole, it just pops up somewhere else. Or you're sitting there with your sharpest knife trying to carve something in water. The lived experience of this might feel like a loss of traction, or in relationships, like someone's messing with your mind. And while possibly frustrating, I don't see this as a useless transit. With oppositions, we want to try to avoid the seesaw situation, which would be feeling like you have to pick one side or the other, or projecting these internal feelings onto other people and relationships. We can look at oppositions as a chance to get right in the middle of these seemingly adversarial conditions and be the fulcrum that connects the two conditions. For instance, with Mars and Neptune, we can figure out how to actively, that's Mars, dream, Neptune, how to animate, Mars, a vision, Neptune, or defend, Mars, those who are afraid or need help, Neptune. And since we're dealing with Virgo and Pisces as well, we can think about things like creating pathways and circuitry to help feelings move, or even imbuing our practical lives with a broader sense of meaning, or being compassionate on purpose in a very targeted way, or intentional surrender, which I want to clarify is very different than passivity. Intentional surrender is more like a tactic or a move to make something happen or change something. Both of these transits lack exactness. The desire is there for sure, but there's difficulty in being precise. Just something to keep in mind, because both of these transits also have a very seductive and passionate quality as well. There's a little bit of hurts so good thing going on too. So that's just the 22nd. We have an equally eventful Wednesday, the 23rd, but in a whole other direction, literally. On the 23rd, the sun enters Virgo, and we are officially in Virgo season. So happy birthday to all of you Virgo suns, and happy sun crossing the ascendant for all of you Virgo risings. Yes, everything is coming up Virgo. Mars and Mercury are in Virgo as well. And on this day, Mercury stations retrograde in the sign as well. Mercury is exalted in Virgo, so it has a lot of dignity here, and that is a saving grace for this retrograde. For those of you who sweat Mercury retrogrades, I think this one is actually very useful, actually very helpful. However, all the same caveats apply with respect to how we operate, communicate, and cognate during this time. This particular retrograde makes me think of terms like reverse engineer, repair, recalculate, and reconfigure. Mercury is doing its work through the element of earth and the material realm. Our minds turn towards the things we can get our hands on. And the big question we're asking now is how? How can we make this work better? How can we undo something so that we can redo it? Our conversations will probably orient to the practical instead of the fanciful. It's not so much time for imagining as it is for construction or reconstruction. And in honor of all of this Virgo we got going on, let's take a moment to immerse ourselves in the experience of it. I'm often tempted to defend Virgo because at face value, it's a deeply misunderstood sign, and it's often talked about in quite in a quite boring fashion. Um, it's not just about cleaning and nitpicking and criticizing, and its only roles are not only that of martyr, humble servant, and virgin. Um, Within this archetype are all manner of medicine and poison, the auto-erotic, the unrelenting taskmaster, and the consort of God, whatever your interpretation of God is, just to name a few. Very not boring stuff, very critical stuff. Um, Virgo is the last sign we visit before we enter into relationship with others in the outside world. That would be the following sign, Libra. In Virgo, we prepare the soul, the body, the mind, or our craft to be of the highest quality and integrity before we share whatever it is we have with others. And yes, oftentimes the thing Virgo is sharing is a service to others. So, in order to offer the best, it spends a lot of time, energy, and care for itself, or, it really should. Um, and this is where some of the correlations to the Hermit card in the tarot can be drawn. It does the dance of hermetically sealing itself off from the world to cultivate and care for themselves or something they're working on. And then it breaks its own seal to deliver service to the world in whatever way it does. It's a dance. Remember, we're dealing with Mercury, so it has to move. And when Virgo gets in trouble, it's usually because it either gets stuck in the hermit phase of isolation and maybe really just working something into the ground, or they deplete themselves by overserving. And that's where we get these, other stereotypes like the martyr stereotypes slash archetypes. um, Virgo is best when it's consistently moving between these two states. Think of like circulation. Virgo instinctively knows that it can't reach its loftiest aspirations and come into ecstatic relationship with others and the world without preparing itself, without doing the humble work of getting its hands dirty, without paying attention to function and refining techniques in order to serve the dream or vision. Virgo, being of Mercury, builds bridges and gateways and ladders, mechanical constructs for the sublime to come down and reach us. Virgo slash Mercury uses these things to help guide love, artistry, and compassion to the body of the earth and bodies of flesh. We can't get to a lot of the things we long for, the feelings we want to have, the beauty we want to experience if we bypass Virgo. So, I mean, that's pretty powerful. Virgo understands better than anyone that the price of magic is discipline and sacrifice. It understands work as a totem of love. Some of the most magical conjurers I know aren't hovering a few inches off the ground with their eyes cast upward. They're on their knees in the glorious dirt of life. Virgo is meant to be used. And we have a negative connotation with that word or that phrase, right? Like to be used or to use somebody is supposed to be wrong. But let me ask you this. What are we on this earth for if not to be used up by life and by people? And I'm not talking about taking advantage of people. I'm not talking about exploitation. I'm talking about all of us having inherent special gifts that make us who we are and understanding that it is our responsibility to hone those gifts so we may offer our best to the world. Everyone wants to be seen for the gifts that they have, their unique gifts, and feel useful. And everyone is. And this is why Leo comes before Virgo. In Leo, we find out what makes us special and we learn to love ourselves. And in Virgo, we practice love in the form of the work it takes to hone our skills, and to ensure that we can be used to our utmost. We must take care of ourselves and our gifts and reserve them for special circumstances that are worthy. And one last word about Virgo being chaste. And this is in reference to the archetype of the Virgin. The Virgin isn't just holding on to it, right? The Virgin is saving it for God, whatever God is for you. So much focus gets put on the abstinence of the Virgin, but here we have the situation again of preparation for an ecstatic and profound union with the divine. You got to get in shape for that. So, you have to meet that with your absolute best. And here's what makes me think of the deep eroticism and the sweet anticipation that fuels the self love that's needed to be able to have the capacity to handle the sublime. It's so funny that everyone thinks they want ecstatic bliss when the truth of the matter is that most of us would not be appropriately prepared to handle it if we got it. So Virgo is where you do the deep care of your own flesh and where you sweetly caress and make love to your talents and gifts. And Virgo is very sexy in that it does not mess around. Um, it brings its best, so you better bring yours. And that's hot. So I went a little long. I'm leaving out one transit. I'm going to have to pick that up next week. But just to leave you with this week is tricky and possibly magical and possibly very frustrating. I'm always interested in learning about how these transits play out for you. My best advice for you this week is to stay fluid. It's not really a time to dig into anything or put your foot down because if you put your foot down too hard, you might slip and fall on your butt. Um, also, want to remind you that even though we're nearing the end of August, your monthly horoscopes and monthly overview are available in Chronogram magazine. They're online and on shelves now. And you can join me next week as we take a look at the Pisces full moon and we will be digging into more Virgo for the next few weeks. So until then, take care, and I will see you next week.